So we're going to take one more session up here now before we go into a coffee break. And again, this is going to be one of our tech spotlights. Topic is going to be IoT. I want to welcome to the stage now for the next 10 minutes, Mr. Brian Romansky with Owl Cyber Defense. Brian.
Thank you.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. So at this conference and a lot of others like it, there's an awful lot of talk about zero trust, a paradigm that's causing a lot of people to rethink their network architectures and rethink their security models. I'm going to talk about a technology that can take that up a notch and actually take you to a level where you don't have to trust somebody on the other side of a connection. I'll refer to it as a never trust model, just to borrow the term. This is not a cutting edge, novel new technique. This is something that's actually used quite a bit today in the military and intelligence, in traditional critical infrastructures like oil refineries in the Middle East that may or may not have had some well-publicized breaches. They use this technology to connect and share data in situations where if there's a data breach, it's not just a loss of a reputation or loss of some PII. Things blow up and people die, and they have to take extreme measures to protect those networks. It's a technology that's now being made available to other more conventional applications in healthcare and financial services. You're well familiar with the general trends, digital transformation. Bill Murray this morning was talking about the risk of third-party connections, and one of the trends in digital transformation is many more third-party connections. You're more dependent today on external providers than you have been in the past. And that means you're dependent on their own security infrastructure and how they operate. Anybody that you do business with and have to share information with, you're often very dependent on their infrastructure. But you can't always evaluate everything about them. You can't always know all of their policies. You do the best you can. We talk a lot about the cloud. I have yet to find anybody who is 100% in the cloud, right? They almost always have some sort of a core application that's so important they want to keep it in their four walls. Or worse, they have some legacy system that can't be ported to the cloud, but it's got some old unpatched operating system, and they're trying to put barriers around it and protect it as best as they can, because that's the thing that has to remain in the plant. And then the Internet of Things inherently means that you've got devices now in your facility, on your network, that to deliver the value proposition that they offer, they have to be physical, they have to be local, and yet they also have to be connected. So how do you share data from these collections of things to business partners or cloud resources without introducing risk? The traditional way to do that is with a firewall. Firewalls have evolved dramatically over the last 20 years or so. So we see fairly advanced firewalls, but there's a fundamental commonality among all of them, right? Firewalls are basically a computer in a box. Now, you might buy a hardware appliance that is a firewall. It's got a brand name on it. It might run a secure OS. It might be pretty well hardened. But at its core, it's still a computer running an operating system with a rule set. And unfortunately, those rules can be wrong. People can make mistakes. There can be a zero-day exploit on the operating system that has not yet been seen. And that becomes a vulnerability, right? Anything that can be configured can be misconfigured. And we see this happen frequently in recent attacks where a firewall misconfiguration led to major breach in a financial services institution. So this fundamental flaw is a problem that we see across all the firewalls out there and similar technologies that depend on sort of complex layers of more software, more countermeasures to protect them. And we actually see an industry growing up around that, right? So now there's a whole industry of systems that monitor your firewall to make sure you have the right patch level, to make sure that the rules are being enforced correctly, because we're well aware that the devices themselves have inherent vulnerabilities. Now, if you take that up to the extreme case, you can have an air-gap network. You could have a network that's not connected to anything else, and that's pretty secure, but not very practical. And again, I've never encountered anybody who can actually operate a truly air-gap system, even in the sort of conventional critical infrastructure world, like nuclear power or places where they have extreme secure needs. Where they have air gaps, they almost always have somebody who breaks that air gap with a USB stick or some other unsanctioned method of moving files into or out of the system. And that often leads to breaches. So it's really hard to maintain a true air gap, even if you could try to do that. What's in between is hardware-based security, devices that provide functionality similar to a firewall and that can provide connectivity, but they're based on the laws of physics. So a data diode is one type of hardware-based technology. It's a device that allows data to flow in one direction, and it does this using basic physics, not really very complicated at its core. Where it gets interesting is all the features and services that you can build around it. Hardware-based security, again, is enforced by the laws of physics, so there's no way for there to be a zero-day exploit. There's no way to leave it misconfigured because it always works the same way. It's fundamentally limited that way. Therefore, we call it unhackable, right? There's no way for somebody to exploit it unless you physically route around it or you physically take it out of the network. If it's there and it's functioning, it's either passing data one way or it's not passing data at all. It's the only way it could possibly fail is to stop moving data. Another nice feature is there's no patches, right? There's never going to be a zero-day exploit on a firewall that can make it vulnerable to moving data in the reverse direction. Very quickly, how this works, the physics of it is pretty simple, right? You've got a light emitter on one side that's sending out data, a light receiver on the other side is receiving data. This is done through a fiber optic link, pretty straightforward technology, relatively mature technology. Where it gets complicated is the fact that if you want to move conventional protocols like TCP/IP, well, you need to terminate that session. You need to send acknowledgments back. You need some way to have a two-way dialogue with the source side, and you need to reestablish that connection on the other side. The way that's done in most data diodes is you package into that proxy server. So you send data to one proxy server, it extracts out the payload. Payload goes across the one-way link to the other side, gets reassembled, and you rebuild the IP stack on the other side. One of the nice tricks about this is you can have a complete protocol break, meaning the source and destination side can be independent networks. The destination proxy server will never know the IP addresses of the source side, never know the architecture of the network. MAC addresses are completely masked. So everything is completely opaque. An attacker who's trying to penetrate that external proxy server gets no information about the internal network. All they ever see is the data that's been allowed to transfer out. Another nice feature is you can run filters on both of those proxy servers. So you can actually enforce rules to say what data is allowed to pass through that. And they can be independent filters on the source and destination side. So even if an insider were to attack your external proxy server, they still can't get backwards into the network or change the type of data that's allowed out from the internal network. So a couple of use cases that I can talk about where we see this used. I mentioned sort of critical infrastructure, oil refineries, power plants, things like that. Any place where you have a truly remote asset like a wellhead or a power generation station, certainly you can use this technology so that information, alerts, alarms, status, production information from that facility can be sent out safely with no risk of a threat coming back in. So you gain that visibility without the risk of a threat. You can extend that into something like healthcare, where that remote station might be an imaging device or a bedside medical device that is reporting out status of a patient. Again, you can get the reporting out, you can connect it to an EMR, you can flow data freely into other systems with zero risk of attacks coming in. You'll recognize there are some limitations to that, right? You might want to do software updates to that device. You might want to send config files to that device. You need a process to work through that, and we do offer solutions that can have an independent filtered path to do those management activities. You can do that through an independent network. You can do that physically. Depending on your risk level and the architecture that you have, there's different ways of managing those devices and getting data into them. Another use case is microsegmentation. We see a lot of customers, particularly in financial services, interested in doing microsegmentation, but they do want to get alerts and alarms from their SIM system out. So if I'm doing threat monitoring inside of an isolated enclave or a transaction processing center, I still want to get alerts and alarms into my systems operation or security operations center. So I'll use a data diode to move those alerts and alarms into my SOC. And that's kind of cool because now I've got data flowing in from lots of disparate systems with different security levels and different security postures, all flowing into the security operations center. How do I know that a risk or a threat doesn't jump from one of those centers to another? Well, if they're all using data diodes to merge all that data together, you can guarantee that you'll never have a threat flow backwards or from one connection to another. It only flows one way into the system, to the security operations center. OT-IT convergence, again, in the conventional world, we see a lot of customers where they're running a plant that used to be isolated, used to be air-gapped. They now can run data into their enterprise to get the data into the enterprise system. What we see more commonly in financial services is people who want to run something like a isolated cyber recovery vault. So you might have a standard backup server, but you're worried that if you are attacked by malware, say a ransomware attack, you don't know when that attack actually happened, so you're still not sure which version of your backup is safe, how far back do you have to go to recover. And a lot of the attackers are getting so clever that they realize, hey, the first thing I'm going to attack before I get detected is the backup system. I'm going to take that down or disable it or corrupt the backup so that if you try to recover, you don't have a backup to go to. You're stuck paying my ransom. So what a lot of sites are doing now is creating what they call an air-gapped cyber recovery center that's isolated from their core network. Well, how do you do an air gap in practice? There's a lot of sort of pseudo techniques that do that, but a data diode is a nice hardware-enforced way to do this. So if you move your data through a data diode to your cyber recovery vault, you can guarantee that your data, your backup can flow one way into that cyber recovery vault, but guarantee that an attacker can't get a two-way command and control access to that system. And if you look at most of the cyber attack kill chains, they almost always either depend on two-way command and control to execute the attack, or they leverage that command and control once they're into the system. If you have more questions, come by our booth. We are making this technology available for other markets. We have brought data diodes down to much lower cost appliances, easy to manage, but have the same core unhackable technology. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Excellent.